Supplier onboarding is super critical. Third-party risk management is super critical to them. OCC is on their head, left, right, and center. They cannot afford to do anything. Because OCC, unlike FDA in life sciences, OCC is much tougher than FDA is when it comes to financial services, right? If you're a bank, you know the pain of third-party risk management. So what have they done? They've invented a 4-month process to onboard a new supplier.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our #1 priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at the independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. Which spend categories should procurement control would always be debatable. Most companies may have a budget threshold where they might dictate the involvement of procurement, but this approach might not be suitable for every category. Some categories may be so strategic even if the budget threshold may not be as high that business might want to take over because of the cross-functional implications or risks. These categories might also have very unique workflow and processes that require unique design compared to the other categories. In today's episode, our guest, Sudhir, Bhojwani, and Yuan Tung discusses the best practices of managing unmanaged spend. They also discuss the disconnect between procurement and business and the scope of procurement. Finally, they describe where Oro Labs fit in the enterprise architecture and how it compares with other workflow automation tools, P2P, CLM, etc. Let me introduce Sudhir and Yuan to you. Sudhir is the co-founder and CEO of Oro Labs. He spent 9 years at SAP Ariba, where he worked as the Chief Procurement Officer, leading engineering, product management, and operations. During his time as CPO, Ariba launched innovations such as guided buying, supplier lifecycle and performance, and supply chain collaboration. Yuan is co-founder and CTO of Oro Labs. Yuan spent more than 15 years at SAP Ariba, where he was the chief architect of Ariba Network, which has over 4 million companies perform millions of transactions annually. Yuan led the CXML committee at Ariba, which has become an industry standard for buyer-supplier collaboration on Ariba and Coupa technology offerings. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hey guys, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks for having us.
Of course, and it's my pleasure. Always from the procurement community, I get very interesting insights. We have had a lot of different perspectives. So obviously, there is a lot happening overall in the procurement tech space. So it's always interesting. Just to kick things off, if my listeners might not know you guys, do you guys want to start with your intros?
Yeah. Hi, I'm CEO and co-founder of a startup called Oro Labs. We are a procurement software company, but before starting Oro, I spent close to 9 years at Ariba, then became part of SAP. I was the chief product officer for SAP Ariba, where I ran engineering, product management, and I call myself, I love procurement still. So we'll talk about why I love procurement, and then why did I start this company after 9 years at SAP Ariba.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for the introduction. And Juan, can I move to you next for your intro, if you don't mind?
Yeah. So my name is Yuan Tung. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Oro Labs. And before this, of course, I spent 18 years in Ariba. I was the chief architect of Ariba Network. And so we started from a little Ariba network with a couple thousand organization all the way to 4 million buyer suppliers. And in the meantime, I had the CXML specification committee, where that I go through all the specs, approve all the standards that's used today in the e-commerce. Yeah.
Okay, amazing introduction there. So yeah, so before we dig into the real topics, and we have so many different layers that we want to hit on, starting from spend pipeline, I guess. Before we do that, we have one of these standard questions that we ask every single guest, and that is going to be your perspective on business growth.
So we started the company 2.5 years back, roughly. We are funded by some pretty good venture capitalists. We raised a Series A, $25 million Series A. So now the question then becomes is, I think there's a lot of attention given to procurement tech in general. And procurement tech is always a little bit of lagging behind CRM tech and marketing tech in general. Procurement tech because considered to be a quote unquote backend function, which I disagree with, which I'll talk about, how it can really have a bigger impact than just being a backend function. So I think I see a lot of business opportunity, and I see with the way the world is moving, offshoring is kind of we know what's going on in that world. That is going to have a direct impact. The growth people are going to see in the US is going to be great, and by virtue of which, the growth in the software spend is going to see great, which is good for our business, I think. So while the economy is going through this rough edges, if you will, I still see a lot of potential. The number of deals we are seeing is incredible, and we will talk about why in a second. But overall, I see business doing I think we are doing quite well, and overall, I think business is still quite healthy.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Sudhir, for that. Now, Yuan, obviously, this is going to be a personal perspective. I know he sort of has the lead in this question, but I mean, I'm looking for your personal perspective on growth. Uh,
So personally, I think if you look at procurement, right, I think the whole industry has been pretty much focusing on what we call source to pay, right? If you
okay,
look at Ariba's history, right, we started with sourcing, which we call upstream. Then we go with downstream, which we call P2P now, right? So together it's called source to pay. Everybody has been just doing this all these years for basically two decades. And what we find is that users still struggling buying stuff. I mean, from source to pay, people think source to pay is complete as a procurement solution, but users still don't know how to buy stuff in a corporate. If you ask any user, try to hire a trainer, try to hire even Ariba, when we try to hire pen test, people have to read the instruction video for 1 hour to figure out how to cut a purchase order for a pen test.
yeah.
There's a struggle people have on the source pay solution. That's why I believe there's a huge growth area for us to actually get out of source pay model to build something which solve this problem for end users, how to buy in a corporate world. Yeah.
Okay, very interesting perspective. Thank you so much for that. So now, obviously, when you look at the whole ecosystem of procurement tech, it was always very confusing. If I speak to my listeners, they struggle to understand the difference between an ERP system and P2P system. If we just cover the procurement, again, if we are talking about e-commerce, then obviously it's going to be far more convoluted. Just in the procurement space, there are so many tools and technologies, and it becomes very confusing. Okay, who does what? And obviously, there is always going to be the overlap as well. Again, when we take the industry layers, sometimes it could differ according to that as well. So let's say if you were to sort of provide a walkthrough of different technologies available, I know Yuan actually touched on the source to pay, and even source to pay can be segmented into procure to pay and your source to pay, which is going to have your strategic sourcing, etc. Then you have, tail spend management. So there is just so much going on there, right? So overall, from the technology perspective, maybe provide some overview of different systems and how they sort of fit in the architecture, which is going to be upstream, downstream. So do you want to start first?
Sure. So we talked about source to pay
Yeah.
as if it's source to pay is one homogeneous system and a homogeneous process, top to bottom. The truth is, if you take a step back,
Yeah.
if you're a manufacturing company, you have a direct spend and indirect spend. So even the quote unquote source to pay package, when it talks about direct spend, which
Yeah.
would be the goods you buy that goes into your bill of material or what you use to manufacture, compared to indirect. Now, indirect will say, okay, indirect must be all the same. But the truth is, the way you buy laptops is not exactly the same
Yeah.
way. Say, for example, you hire field services, or the way you hire marketing services, or IT consulting services, or the way you purchase the software. It's not all the same.
Yep.
So what I'm saying is the spend actually matters, broadly speaking. Now, given that perspective, let's talk about source to pay, right? When you take sourcing as a module, the way you source direct material, marketing, other stuff is very different.
Yeah.
Then you have contracting. The way you do contracting is also different. Now, people talk about P2P. The reality is the last part of P is the payment, before which comes invoicing.
Yeah.
There's an invoicing solution there too. Now, when it comes to invoicing, you have an AP team that controls the invoicing piece, because AP is responsible for paying the invoices. So what is the role of procurement? So where I'm going with this is, while there is a source to pay suite, you're absolutely right. You can split them into many, many different smaller chunks, and then you realize this is a pretty complex ecosystem, which needs a little bit further dissection to be able to understand. I'd like Yuan chime in as well a little bit.
Yeah. So I'm looking at it, right? So which means that I think people keep, basically when we slice the procurement solution, either you slice as a functionality, right? Which sort to pay, right? You have a sourcing, which does IFQ, IFPs. Then eventually try to create a contract module, which is Ariba today. The contract module is part of what we call upstreams.
Yeah.
Try to create a contract that flow into downstream, and that used as a guide for pricing and for the obligation, right? Tracking, right? Then they go to procure, and then to payment, which goes to invoicing, receipts. Then you go to payment. So it sounds actually quite possible that everything should be covered already. Unfortunately, today, right? I mean, if you look at it, I would rather say it's more of a commodity spend versus ad hoc service spend, right? Ad hoc services, most of services are not really repeatable, right? It means I hire somebody to do events, the next event will be somebody else, right? It's another engagement, right? So I would rather look at it as more ad hoc versus commodity spend, right? Commodity spend today, I think most of the procure to pay system work pretty well, right? You create a catalog, punch outs, you buy the stuff, you put it in the shopping cart, and there you go, right? They're actually pretty well established. The problem right now is more of a service spend, which is ad hoc. And some people call it the tail end spend. But if you just tell the truth, right, that tail end spend probably consists of 80% of the spend of any company today. We keep calling it ad hoc. So, which means ad hoc, some people more of it dissect it as more of a low dollar amount spent. Ad hoc low dollar amount spent. But a high dollar amount spent today, usually, if you look at procurement system, right, you do a little bit of sourcing, which is effective. Actually, you're using a contract module. You're not really using the sourcing module, you're using a contract module. Try to create obligations, which means that all the due diligence somehow is in that black box, right? So you actually, first of all, as a user, you have to know that I'm going to I have to ask somebody to create a contract project in the contract module to actually negotiate everything, do all the due diligence over there. Eventually, there's a contract number comes out, and I use that contract number means everything's good. That's how this world looks like today in sort to pay. And that black box usually sometimes take 1 month, sometimes take 4 months.
Yeah.
Nobody knows what else is going on. As the end user, you're just waiting for that contract number finally show up in your email. Then you can proceed to procure the pay to cut a purchase order. And that cutting of that purchase order actually takes 5 minutes. No matter how hard, how bad a procurement system is, it cannot take more than 5 minutes once you have that contract number. And so, which means that most of people try to improve that is actually, I think, the forced goal. The first black box is the one we try to solve. And that's why we're looking at it right now.
And I tell you, Sam, let me elaborate one more reason why we started Oro. What was the genesis of it?
Yeah.
How we came about to the conclusion. If you look at the whole source to pay landscape today is built on this Kroljic matrix. You've seen that Kroljic matrix, which tells you how should procurement define their processes to optimize the savings.
Yeah.
Okay. And that Kroljic matrix tells you should try to give all the spend to a very small set of preferred suppliers, as small a set of suppliers as you can, so that you can drive the price and also compliance. Right. So it drives efficiency as well as savings, both.
Yeah.
But here's my realization. I ran Ariba. I had a team of 2,000 people under me, reporting to me. I had a reasonable budget, let's say. We bought 600 laptops in my team every single year. That spend will be a few million at least, right? In the ballpark, whatever it is. Do you think I cared? Pretty big spend. Anybody would say buying 600 laptops a year would be a pretty important spend for anybody. But do you think as a business leader, I could care less about it? I could care less. The reality, I didn't care as much about that, buying a laptops. But then what Yuan was alluding to, I had to hire an external trainer to come and teach my team the next generation software technology we wanted to use. So I had to upscale my team. I had to hire an external trainer. And I had heard about this trainer from one of my close friends at a different company. He said, hey, this trainer is amazing at this stuff. And I wanted to absolutely hire this person, no matter what. The spend was less than 100,000. I can tell you that. I cared a whole lot more for that than whatever millions we spend on the laptops. I can tell you that much. So that's the disconnect between procurement and business, which is what has the crux of the problem, which is like procurement is derived to, if you think fundamentally, procurement is born to drive commodity based spend to drive savings. If I'm a marketeer, my goal is to return the value. ROI is a fundamental thing a marketeer does, as an example. So if I'm going to work with an agency to do a campaign, I'm going to focus on ROI a lot myself. Now, doesn't mean procurement cannot help me, and that's not what I'm suggesting here by any stretch of imagination, as a matter of fact. In fact, I think procurement can help, but the systems were not geared to solve this kind of problem. That's what we're trying to highlight.
Okay, so very interesting perspective there. So I am going to unpack a little bit in both of your conversations. So first, I mean, we want to position wherever you guys are playing in the right light. So obviously, we started discussing first the difference between your source to pay and procure to pay, and then I think you provided a little description there overall with respect to the direct and indirect spend. Indirect as well, you have sort of the contract, and then you have the tail spend as well that you were talking about. So, in the example that you gave, it's really for the tail spend. That's my understanding. The laptop example, Sudhir, that you followed up. So, are you guys playing more in the tail spend space? Yeah. So, do you want to clarify that a little bit?
So, firstly, tail spend is a very wrong word.
Okay.
Sudhir at SAP would have never mentioned the word tail spend to hire a trainer.
Okay.
That has a direct impact on my business. A marketing person is never going to name working with a new marketing agency for a PR campaign as a tail spend. People think tail spend is buying adapters and chargers. Who cares? Typically, when people give tail spend example, long tail, people are buying lots of adapters.
Yeah.
It's not true, actually. It's not true, actually. Let's say an engineer at a Ford Motor Company I was talking to, he say, hey, I'm working on next generation F-150. Let's say he or she the engineer wants to buy a part that he or she is going to experiment with. The part is going to call 80,000. Would you call it tail spend? Yeah, you will. From a logic metrics perspective, it's a tail spend. But is the right word for it, actually? Is that the right word for it? Giving that kind of almost bad name to it, I would say. I actually think it's really, really critical that's the whole genesis of our idea. We don't believe that word even makes sense, actually. That adapters and chargers, forget it. That's Amazon business anyways. That's going to go to Amazon or some other companies. They're going to consolidate that stuff. Like MRO stuff is getting consolidated with Granger. Some will get, lab supplies will get consolidated with VWR or whoever else, Thermo Fisher, whatever. And likewise, Amazon is going to consolidate some of that stuff. But the interesting and important business managed spend, I think when I look at let's take an example of a company. Let's say I'm a software company. We have a customer like Optimizely.
Yeah.
If you look at the spend, how does the spend look like? Let's look at it. They will have big spend with large cloud providers like GCP, Amazon, whoever they're doing business with. That will be probably the biggest chunk of the spend. There are like 3 of them. But that spend is managed in a very special way. So forget that. That's a very, very special category, right? Then broadly speaking, I would say, I would categorize their spend into 4 buckets. Software spend, yeah. Their marketing spend, which is primarily services, right? I'll say they hire a lot of contingent worker,
yeah,
right? And everything else, where the facilities and everything else will fit in. Those are the 4 spend buckets. Now let's go through each one of them and see which one of them fits the tail spend name. I buy a software. I don't buy the same software 125 times last I checked. I buy the software only once, and usually it lasts me, I sign a 2-year agreement. So that doesn't fit your classic metrics. So that would be tail spend. Let's say marketing campaign. I'm going to participate in an event in Brazil to generate some demand gen because we're going to launch something in Brazil. I don't launch every new thing in Brazil every year. Quote unquote tail spend again, not a tail spend. The second example, contingent workers. I hire all kinds of people. It's a big spend for me, hiring contingent worker. That's a third spend. And facilities, facilities, part of it is repeat spend. You can say, maybe we can apply source to pay solution to it and solve the problem. So that's how I think of the problem, Sam, more than the way classically people have thought of it. So we don't think it necessarily makes sense. So for small company, that spend we are describing represents a fairly significant chunk. 60%, I believe, what classically would have called unmanaged spend. Unmanaged spend is probably a better way of thinking about it. That cannot be managed, and procurement has very low influence on it. In a large company with the best procurement solution, I tell you that spend could still be 35-40%. But 40% procurement, while there's a purchase order for it, people say, oh, I created a purchase order. That means it must be managed spend. Really? Creating a purchase order, as Yuan said, get 2 minutes. How does it qualify as a managed spend? Managed spend is when you had an influence, it went through the right process, and you are 100% sure it's the right thing to do for the company. That's what I would qualify as a managed spend. And not just that, hey, I have a purchase order.
Yeah, great points. Yuan, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, so I think if you look at it from an end user's point of view, right? Usually end up doing was that if you are under $10,000, click here. If you require legal assistance on privacy, maybe you are giving out privacy there, click here. And so from end user point of view, they have to know the process and click on the right tool to get it right. This is what problem people have today, right? So which means, how do I know I need to create a contract? And how do I know I need to sign DPA? How do I know I need to sign MSA? How do I know I need to sign NDA? Nobody knows. And so basically, go read a document on SharePoint. Hopefully, you know by then, after reading that book of instructions from the corporate website, and you figure it out and click on the right click and choose the right tool to proceed. Otherwise, you're stuck again, right? From end user point. Yeah.
Yeah, I could not agree more. So, guys, great point. And I completely agree with you that, I don't think this should be called tail spend. And that was not my understanding of tail spend, to be honest. Okay. So you are talking about the unmanaged spend that does not go through procurement. I'm trying to rephrase my understanding as well to make sure we are on the same page that, okay, you are talking about the spend that does not go through procurement. And that is going to be, for example, let's say if anybody's buying ERP. Okay. Now, procurement, sometimes they
Anybody's
get
buying Oro Labs too. Oro Labs too.
Right. So those spend categories, they definitely don't go through procurement. Sometimes they are going to be involved. Sometimes their involvement is going to be very limited. In fact, I'll tell you what, okay? Business does not want procurement to be involved in most of their purchases. So you mentioned 60% of the spend. I think that might vary per industries, depending upon which industry you are talking about. Since you were referring to the software, in the case of software, you are going to have far more unmanaged spend. The way software business is managed in general, you don't have repeatable spend a lot, right? You don't have predictable spend. So most of them is probably going to be unmanaged. And that's probably the reason why you probably are playing in that space, is because you are far more natural fit in general in that space, right? Now, when you look at the business, I mean, if I, as a business, if I want to do something, I'm a sales guy, I'm a marketing guy. Okay. I'm trying to meet my number in this quarter. If I involve my procurement, it's going to be really, really hard to buy something. We all know this, how this works, right? And if it is going to be, even if it is going to be big purchase or a small purchase, it doesn't matter, because procurement go through these strict procedures and policies. And sometimes the negotiation does not go through. And then because of that, I'm not able to meet my business goals. So I don't know whether you are seeing this challenge, and what pushback you are getting either from executive. Is the company buying the whole idea of the centralized spend management across the categories? I don't know whether you guys agree with me, don't agree with me.
So this is we've been enlightened, let's say, talking to our customers now. Actually, you have to listen sometimes, right? What happened is at Ariba, we spent so many years. And my conclusion is we were building a solution for procurement department as opposed to procurement problem. Yeah. So we were building a solution that's what Ariba, Coupa, and a lot of those guys, a lot of industry has done, build solution for procurement department. Whereas we need to solution for procurement, not procurement department. So that's the big difference. But to answer your question, having said that, let's take an example. I was talking to CIO of a very large bank. Now, they say supplier onboarding is super critical. Third-party risk management is super critical to them.
Yeah.
OCC is on their head, left, right, and center. They cannot afford to do anything. Because OCC, unlike FDA in life sciences, OCC is much tougher than FDA is.
Yeah.
When it comes to financial services, right? If you're a bank, you know the pain of third-party risk management. So what have they done? They've invented a 4-month process to onboard a new supplier. It's easy. 3 to 4 months is not that uncommon in a bank to onboard a new supplier. Then you go through the steps in the process. I was looking at the whole workflow for one of the largest banks, the number of steps that exist in the process. And I was thinking, who owns this step in the process? This is owned by legal. Does procurement have any influence on legal? Last I checked, no. Who owns this process? This is owned by security. Procurement definitely has no influence on security. Awesome. That step is owned for compliance. They, as it turns out, don't have. There's a risk and compliance officer, which is at a higher level, reports directly to the CEO in many cases at a financial services company to do antitrust and everything, all that stuff. That's there. When you go through these steps, you realize procurement is one step in the process. So what I'm trying to say is, in the overall procurement process, the core negotiation skill that a procurement typically has is just one step in the process, but they get blamed for the whole process. So we sympathize a lot with procurement actually. So I love procurement. I'll proudly and happily say that. But I think because the problem is more complex than people give it credit, that's the reason Oro Labs, our main mission is smart procurement workflows. And because we feel what procurement workflows are far more complex and they are owned by multiple stakeholders in any given company. And to truly get an amazing experience, which we call spend under management, which is the grand vision we all have with risk as the core, compliance as the core, and saving as the core. So all these pillars have to be met, and there are multiple stakeholders who participate. So that's how I would say is Sam. So while I agree with you in essence that nobody wants to involve procurement because it slows things down, I do agree in the result of it is that, but the reality is actually more complex than that is what I'm trying to say.
Great points. Yuan, you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I think just add to what Sudhir was saying, right? So if I'm an email marketing person, right, you have to realize your campaign start to collect personal data. Everybody knows that. Now you are subject to GDPR, all these rules, right? All these privacy rules, and that's what procurement as an organization try to achieve was, and that all the rest of the company knows, right? So there are certain things need to be due diligence needs to be done. Except that thing is all opaque as a policy in a SharePoint where nobody knows what the hell is going on, right? And nobody knows where it's stuck. People, as Sudhir said, people blame procurement, putting out these weird policies. And the truth is that because it's needed, once, you can see all these companies getting fined left and right. We're talking about $100 million, $1 billion sometimes for violating these rules. And so the stake for business is actually quite high for not doing the due diligence and not having a proper legal coverage. So which means that I think today I would say blaming our software vendor who has not been solving this problem. Knowing the root of the problem is that all the legal compliances, especially right now, procurement acting as a gate with no control on what outcome. And now the idea was for us as a software vendor to solve this problem. Right, create visibility, create accountability, and create visibility, actually primary visibility to the stakeholders. Let them know that things are moving along, and where and who's responsible for the next step, and to orchestrate that whole process.
Yeah, so very interesting perspectives, guys. So again, I'm going to unpack a little bit based on your commentaries. And one of the things, 4-month procurement process, seriously. Okay, obviously that's very long, right?
That's fast. That's fast, Sam.
That's fast, right? Yeah, exactly. That's fast. Okay, so one of the drawback of that 4-month procurement process is going to be the smart vendors, to be honest, they don't want to engage with those businesses because 4 months is just too long time for any, for us, let's say if I am looking at a deal and if somebody is going to tell me that it is going to take 4 months, that's it, I'm done. I don't want to touch that deal, to be honest, okay? Unless, we are dealing with like millions and millions of dollars and it's a different case, then we can probably forecast and decide. But most of the vendors that I know, especially the good ones, they are very careful in the kind of, businesses that they engage with. So that's why, I think the goal should be to reduce the total time. And I guess that's what you guys are trying to do overall from the procurement workflow perspective. Now, how I'm going to describe two different things. Number one is going to be how businesses manage this, especially when you look at the department level, right? So I completely agree with you guys that there has to be central compliance, the legal review. You cannot sign the contract if that's going to be trouble for the company. So that has to go through it, right? But typically how companies manage this is they are going to have budget at the department level and department has sort of freedom to buy whatever they want. Now, procurement obviously does not like that. Okay, there's no question about that. They want to control every single dollar. And that's how most of the organizations work. But they are going to be involved during the PO process. They are going to be involved during the legal process. They are going to be involved during the contract process. It's just that the vendor that they might want to work with, they might hire that vendor. They might not involve them during the selection, etc. But once the deal is finalized, then most likely somebody is going to review the contract. That's how I have seen. Now, the other scenario, you mentioned the workflows, right? I know a company called ServiceNow. I don't know whether you come across them, whether you consider them as your competitors, but they are trying to do similar things, to be honest, okay? One of the use cases that they have is vendor onboarding, and they are trying to do anything and everything around P2P, anything and everything around ERP. So they are playing in that space as well, and they are trying to build similar workflows. And in my mind, I think you guys are trying to do the similar things as well. So let's say if you were to compare and contrast between these two, how would you do that?
So first, to a degree, yes. To a degree, no, I would say, first and foremost. And I'll say why I say that. Like, we will never try to be an ITSM tool. Yes, we have zero interest in that. Zero. But of course, they have interest in going out of ITSM, which they are, as you rightly said. We are a workflow tool designed for procurement and supply chain, first and foremost. What does it really mean? That means you can implement when you look at the supplier onboarding process, it's really complex. It's a complex RACI matrix, responsibility accountability matrix. It's pretty complex. Yeah. We are designed to implement that matrix with the least amount of effort. You can implement. We have a very large life sciences companies as a customer, one of the largest life sciences, the top 10 life sciences companies globally. They will implement a complex workflow in our tool in less than 3 months. Now, this is like full automated workflow in 2 months. And why is that possible? Because we were built for that. We are not built for solving an ITSM problem. What does it really mean? Like, what are the core objects in procurement if you think about it? Vendor object is one of the core objects, supplier object, one of the most complex objects in procurement. You can have, how many times have you heard the complex problems such as, hey, I have duplicate vendors in my ERP? Everybody has that problem.
Yeah.
Our systems understand that natively. You don't need to teach us that. We also understand why duplicate records exist in ERP. Okay, no problem. How many times have you heard the problem that, oh, I have a sourcing system, but my sourcing system and my vendor record in ERP, they don't connect. I don't know which record maps to what. No problem. We know how to connect those things. So supplier object is one of the key objects in the system. Second object. How many times you heard the problem such as, hey, I don't know which vendor I use for what. I tell you how to find what you're doing with the vendor. Ask the sales guy. He'll tell you what your company is buying from them. There's no visibility on what does. Why is that? The reason is actually the contract visibility is also big problem. We're not saying we are a CLM tool. We don't want to be a CLM tool, but we natively want to understand the contract terms. And why is it important? That allows the process to be smarter. That's the reason. That's the intent. We're not trying to replace Ironclad or Ariba or any of those tools. You need CLM tool. You have to buy those tools. We're not a replacement for that. So we understand that concept. Third concept, assessment. We talked about data privacy. Yuan mentioned. One of our customers actually is pretty interesting. They track which information is shared with what supplier. So they track to the nth degree because they are in regulated industry. Yeah. We share email ID of advisor. We share phone number of our employee with this vendor. They track at that level. Can you answer the question in a very simple way? Tell me the suppliers we are sharing employees' phone number with a click. That's not possible today. So I'm giving some examples to highlight the core pain. So these concepts you understand natively by virtue of it, implementing a workflow in a manageable way, in a TCO which is far less, is realistic. So I think we are really built for that. That's the core answer to that, Sam. We are built for this. We understand these objects. Our workflows can implement that in a much, much easier way, by virtue of which your TCO will be a whole lot lower.
Okay.
And experience will be great too, by the way. I forgot to mention, the most important is the user experience point, which eventually, I believe adoption and user experience go together. If users don't adopt, will be because their experience is not good. If the experience is not good, is because they don't understand the system. And fundamentally, Yuan gives this example. He gave me the example once upon a time, once I met him first time. He said, Sudhir, if you go to Craigslist.com, do you think Craigslist.com has the best user experience? I say, yes, it does. But does it have the most beautiful looking UI? Debatable. But put my house on a rent, it goes off pretty fast. Yeah. That's what we want to do. That's our goal. We want to make user do things faster. At the same time, we want to bring more spend under management. We can kill two birds with one stone, and we are designed for that work, not an ITSM.
Yuan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I think probably the difference between we call native workflows, right, which is basically a no-code engine with workflows, right? What we find is that we have to build from scratch. For our no-code engine was to solve the problem was that we're dealing with multiple personas within one workflow, right? Legal reviews, I only care about the legal part of the request. Privacy, I only care about privacy part of the request. Because there's so much information is put into the request, end user from each persona are usually so confused what they should be looking at, looking for the relevant information that they can use to make a decision. So for us to be able to come out with a system which we only present the relevant information to the stakeholder, and for them to capture their own relevant information to use for later For example, right, in the privacy assessment, right, I have to capture that we're going to give this vendor our email address of our board members. That is captured, but the problem is that the requester doesn't know about it. So requester couldn't answer it in the intake process. So usually after you negotiate with the supplier, then you realize what that is. And to be able to capture the information and show that to the next lawyer who is doing the review for the same vendor, that's where the difficult part is, whether the naked workflow couldn't solve.
Yeah, could not agree more, guys. I mean, there are some really great points overall from the data privacy perspective. Also reporting GDPR, when you look into those scenarios, obviously it gets very involved. And there's a lot of admin effort that you need to put in to be able to, number one, track, number two, report. Okay. I am going to follow up with one comment, and we are going to unpack a little bit based on your comments. Okay. So you mentioned that, you know what, when you look at these vendors and vendor instances, it's just easier for us to be able to sort of have that single source of truth is what you are talking about. Vendor, in my mind, single source of truth is always, it's a rocket science. Okay, even for companies such as Zoom Info, it's very hard to figure out, okay, who is the vendor. So maybe you can describe your process in terms of how you are able to manage the single source of truth from the vendor perspective. In my mind, if I look in, when Juan, you might be able to relate with this, right? So as the CIO, as the architect, for you, the more data stores you are going to have, the more challenging it is going to be to have that single source of truth. So now you guys are proposing that, I have this wonderful system that you have to have in your architecture, or obviously you are going to be spending a lot of time. I get it. Okay. But at the same time, that additional system always is going to increase the complexity in managing the vendor record across the system. Unless you guys are not maintaining any vendor records in your system, my understanding is that you are. So now this is a separate data store that I need to introduce to my architecture. So now you tell me, what is the sort of source of information here? Who is going to be the source of authority? How is the one vendor record is maintained across the system? And how is sort of broadcasted to all of these systems? I don't know who want to start. Any one of you.
You want to start, Yuan?
Yeah, sure. So that's why I think we believe, right, only chance of having a central repository effective on for example, vendor object, right, is actually should be happening in the orchestration layer. Orchestration layer is the one where that it connects with all the processes, all the tools. That's why we build our system for, right? When we do orchestration with another system, we can actually natively bring in the data from the other system, any kind of data, to inject it into our process to be able to capture that, make it reportable, and make it visible, and only relevant to the right stakeholders. This is how our system does. That's why we believe that any business should introduce an orchestration layer, which solves the usability problem. The usability problem is more than just UI. It's actually to present the information in a holistic manner whether people can make the right decision. Instead of, I think I talked to one of our customers, I think a long time ago, some big pharmaceutical company. It's called swivel chair problem. I do some work over it. I swivel my chair to another app to look something up and bring that information back to the app so I can do another work. Then I swivel to another chair to another app and look something up and come back again. And we build our orchestration layer to be able to allow other systems to inject very easily, that integration layer, that data bring into our world to make it visible, presented to the end user, reportable as well. Yeah.
Okay. So do you have anything to add?
Yeah. One thing I like to add is, look, I think what we are not saying, to be clear, we are not suggesting that you don't need vendor records in ERP. Financial systems need vendor record. Let's be clear about it. And they should be, from a finance perspective, they should be considered the source of truth. We are not trying to say we become the source of truth, certainly for your finance records. But can we disintermediate, intermediate? Yes, we can. That's what we are suggesting. Likewise, we are not suggesting you don't need a vendor record in your CLM tool. We're not suggesting that at all. Nor are we suggesting you don't need a vendor record in your PLM tool or your CLM tool. We need a vendor record in all of these tools. But what we are suggesting is, as a part of orchestration, we can deliver an experience. Our vendor object is an aggregation of this. And you mentioned Zoom Info. Yes, we do that's an enrichment part, which is like, hey, if I have two vendor records in my ERP, but neither of them have a logo even of the company, let alone, and the names are also funny looking sometimes. You can't even identify the company names. But now I give a normalized view of the world. So normalized view of the world doesn't mean we're trying to compete with Zoom Info by any stretch of imagination. We're not trying to be Zoom Info. Our goal is to provide that normalized view across all different vendor objects that may exist in various systems so the user can make it. So Sam, one thing I forgot to mention in our conversation, when you look at our tagline, smart procurement workflows, I was trying to describe it to somebody. How do you describe the essence of what we do? The essence of the way I thought of it is poor workflow is equal to poor data, is equal to poor decisions. So if you have a poor workflow or no orchestration, which is the current state, your data is going to be poor. People are running around with Excel sheets left, right, and center. Yeah. Even the best companies with quote unquote best procurement implemented, they're running around with data sheets all over the place. And how can you make the right decisions when you don't have the data? So that's why you need a platform like us in our mind.
Okay, amazing, guys. Did you guys want to touch anything else that you wanted to cover as part of this episode that we could not cover? Sudhir, I'll start with you.
Yeah, a couple of things I want to do. I want to eventually deliver the value. What is the value of orchestration? And I alluded to it. We will deliver better workflow, which will improve your user experience, which will make the things go faster. What is the benefit of it? You will get better data. What can I do with it? I can do better decisions. So what kind of decisions I can do better? In real time, I can do spend management using our platform. Real spend management. I can really do risk management in real time, right? So those are the two. And the third thing is I really can define what the business outcome should be from my perspective. So really, it really gives you the knob that you need from a finance perspective as a business leader to be able to control your spend in a much, much better way. And at the same time, don't have an NPS score of your employees being minus 125 when it comes to procurement and finance.
Okay, amazing. Juan, do you have anything to add? Did you want to cover anything else?
No, I'm good. Yeah, I think cover everything. So.
Amazing. So the last thing that we typically cover as part of these episodes is going to be the closing advice. Do you guys have any sort of closing advice for our listeners? Sudhir, I'll start with you.
I really think automation, digitization is super critical. And I believe in the day and age of data. Let's focus on generating the right data. So then AI can be leveraged in a potentially smart way. I think without data, AI is, in my mind, not as interesting or useful. So I think data is the crux of the problem, I fundamentally believe, and not automating workflows. If people continue to use emails and offline stuff, you're never going to have data. So I would say focusing on automating as a digitization strategy to get right data, to make right decisions. That's whether you use our tool or not is irrelevant, but that should be the right strategy in my mind.
Okay, amazing. Juan, do you have any closing advice, please?
Yeah, so I think what happened was that we're looking at this problem was that I always laugh was that, I mean, we as a system keep moving structured data into unstructured data and back to structured data. If you look at it, you have structured data in an invoicing system, you print out a PDF file that becomes unstructured and try to extract that invoice back into a PDF, from PDF into an invoice, right? That's what world is, right? If you look at all these orchestration data workflow people are doing today, was that email going left and right because there's no system to capture them, to help user to capture them. So the data quality is actually quite poor. And so, which means that you end up making a wrong decision or capture wrong data, right? If you look at today, right, people try to do a scanning of a contract, PDF contract back to a contract data, right? This is just, it's just mind-boggling sometimes if I think of it. I think it's the tool's fault, but if you look at it, that's a problem we have today.
Yeah, could not agree more, guys. And my personal takeaway from this conversation is going to be there is so much happening in the procurement tech space. So make sure you guys review and understand how that might be a fit for your architecture. On that note, I want to thank you both for your time. This has been a powerful episode.
Right.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you would like to learn more about Sudhir or Yuan or Orolabs, head over to orolabs.ai. It's OROLABS.ai. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to get you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.